thank you all for being here. This event, we are calling it the Introduction to Affordable Housing Finance. So we know there's a housing crisis in Los Angeles and beyond. It can be frustrating for some of us because we're like, well, we just need housing, build the housing, what's the holdup? There are a lot of holdups. One of the processes that's new to me is getting projects funded. What does that look like? What are the challenges? And so we have some amazing folks here that are going to give us a little taste, a little appetizer of affordable housing finance, and then we can take that and equip ourselves with that knowledge to be able to be better advocates, policymakers, and whatnot. So I'm going to introduce our panelists here. We have Ben Creed. Ben Creed, would you like to give a little introduction?
Sure, thanks, Josh. And my camera's telling me I can't turn it on, but that's okay. Nobody came here to see my face. I've worked in nonprofit affordable housing for the last 6.5 years. First as a developer at a community-based nonprofit, and for the last 2.5, approaching 3 years, as a financial consultant, working with nonprofit affordable housing developers throughout Southern California.
Nice, thank you so much. And next we have Alan Greenlee. Alan, please take it away.
Certainly. Thanks, Josh, and thanks to the folks at Abundant Housing for having me. My name is Alan Greenlee. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. We are a membership organization that represents those who are in the business of building and operating housing that's affordable to low-income people. We represent the 5 Southern California counties of Ventura, LA, Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange, 15,000 square miles, 18 million people, about half of the state legislature, about half of the population, and the majority of the low-income people in the state. I also have the honor to be serving as the president of the board of directors for Abundant Housing in LA, and have been involved with this organization since before it even was a real thing. So I'm happy to see the growth of the organization and be able to support it in this very small way today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just so everyone knows, we have one other panelist, and I'm just trying to make sure we can give them the proper permissions. Is Josh Hamilton, are you in with us right now?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you. There you go. You want to give us a brief intro?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Josh Hamilton. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Century Housing. And Century Housing is a CDFI. We're a nonprofit community development finance institution. Our whole mission is to provide early stage financing to affordable housing properties throughout California. So I'm based here in Southern California in the city of Culver City. We have an office in the Bay Area as well. And we work throughout the state of California with a number of different affordable housing developers, helping to provide acquisition, construction. We also do some permanent financing to see those projects come to fruition. So we are big fans of affordable housing. It is something that I think is really fundamental to a healthy community, is that people can afford to live and work in their community. It's also fundamental to making sure that people who, for whatever reason, are unable to afford housing, that they be given a place to live so they cannot become homeless. So it's really good to be here, Josh. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to learning more as we go.
Nice. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. So we have a little bit of a loose agenda, but I know the first thing we're going to be doing is we're actually going to have Ben Creed give us a little bit of a table setter. So he has some information about the low-income housing tax credit, among other things. So Ben, if you'd like to take that away, please do.
Okay, can you hear me? And do you see a white rectangle?
Yes and yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. And yeah, so I'm here to set the table, so to speak, and just to provide a little bit of context for the conversation to follow. You know, as I said, I've been in the field for about 6.5 years, but it took quite some time for some of these fairly basic concepts to sort of crystallize for me. And so my hope is just in my 15 minutes is just to share what clicked for me. And it's in the hopes that it maybe clicks for folks in the audience a little bit faster than the amount of time that it took to click for me. The two main topics I'm going to cover is just what exactly is meant by affordability in the policy and in the practice of affordable housing. And I'm going to provide sort of example numbers of a very simple market rate apartment building, and then an opportunity to see what would be different if this was 100% affordable for low-income households, and what in the financing would be different if it was a mixed income building with some market rate and some low-income, low-rent units. So hopefully it provides sort of a decent context for the conversation to follow. So to dive right in, what is meant by affordable housing in the policy context is when 30% or less of a household's income is going towards their housing costs. And I'm using rent here as a shorthand for housing costs. And as far as who affordable housing is concerned with and is trying to serve, the starting point is usually the median income household. How are they doing in a given area? Area median income is federal data that's done typically on a county basis. And so in LA County in the year 2022, a one-person household making $84,000 a year is at the median, meaning half of one-person households in LA County are making more than that this year and half are making less than that. An affordable rent using the 30% of income metric would be $2,100 a month for this presumably studio or one-bedroom apartment that this household needs. And for a four-person household, the median income in LA County this year is $120,000. And so an affordable rent would be $3,000 for the 2 or the 3-bedroom apartment that they would presumably be looking for. And so if we think about what sort of going rents are these days, you know, $2,100 for a studio, 1-bedroom, $3,000 for a 2 or 3-bedroom. Not the most expensive units out there, but there's definitely some availability here. And so the people at the median, you know, it's harder today than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago to find housing. There's going to be less availability, as abundant housing members know so well. But this is not sort of the face of the affordability crisis, the median income household. Low income as a policy term is typically defined as starting at 80% of the median. And so at these income levels and at these affordable rents, this is where you start to see a bit more of a crunch. If you're looking for an affordable studio or 1-bedroom and you're making $66,000 a year, your options might be more limited. You might have to make some sacrifices or maybe pay more than this affordable rent. For the low-income four-person household, same idea, $2,400 for a 2-bed, $2,400 for a 3-bedroom unit. Now it's getting a little bit tough. And especially at the what's called very low-income level, half or 50% of the median income. Now these households are, if they're looking for housing today in LA County, they're in all likelihood going to have to make some sacrifices, either on location, longer commute, not as close to school or job or other resources, parks, the library, you know, the neighborhood you grew up in, perhaps, if you wanted to stay there, and or paying more than that sort of affordable 30% of income. And households that are paying more than 30% of their income, the policy term is rent burdened. And once you get down to the extremely low income level, defined as typically as 30% of median, now virtually everybody, if they're looking for housing today, is going to be rent burdened or severely rent burdened, meaning more than half of their income is going towards housing costs. Studio 1-bedroom for $600, really, really hard, if not impossible, to come by in LA County. $900 for a 2 or 3-bedroom unit, forget it. And so these households and households making less than 24K for an individual, 36K for the 4-person household, they're going to be making sacrifices in terms of location and other things that they want in their apartment, and they're in all likelihood going to be paying a lot more than an affordable portion of their income. And so affordable housing policy and funding programs are aimed where there's the greatest amount of need, the very low, extremely low income levels typically. Some affordable housing developments, many actually will have some units at serving households at 60% of AMI. Occasionally nowadays you might see 70 or 80% of AMI in the building, but certainly in California, they're all required and incentivized to serve the very low, extremely low, and sometimes even lower income levels by restricting rents for households at these income levels. Okay, so that is what's meant by affordable in this context, in terms with some dollars as an example. The basic financing structure, not just of affordable housing, but of any simple apartment building, is not all that different from any kind of business or enterprise where there's some large upfront costs that are one time to get the thing started, which are followed by months and months and years of cash flow, of income coming in, expenses and bills that have to get paid, and leftover money that has to repay the funding sources that put up the money initially for those upfront costs. And so whether you're starting a restaurant and you have to buy a lot of equipment before you've sold a single dish, or if you're developing a building and you've got a lot of architecture, engineering, and construction to do before you've collected a single month's rent. What you ultimately need to have is rent coming in that can pay the monthly bills, insurance, property management, maintenance, repairs, and have enough money left over, net operating income, to repay the many millions of dollars that you needed up front to acquire the land and get this thing designed and built. Because you can't pay your architect or your carpenter or your plumber with the promise of rental income from next year and the year after and the year after that. So you're probably going to have to get a loan from a lender, an investment from an investor up front, and they are going to need to get paid back and then some in order to make it worth their while to provide that upfront money. In an affordable housing context, when the rents are low to serve lower income households, there's probably not going to be enough rental income to repay those upfront sources entirely. There may not even be enough rental income to pay the monthly and annual operating expenses. And so that is where subsidy, public funds, come into play, either up front to develop or acquire the building, or during operations to prop up the cash flow so the bills can get paid and so that more of the upfront sources of funds can get paid back with the interest or the return that they need. And so to put some specifics on here, I have a sort of very hypothetical and probably oversimplified market rate unsubsidized building. If we imagine 50 units, if we imagine the total cost including the land is $400,000 per unit, so $20 million to get this thing built. And if we imagine $3,000 a month rents here, so not the fanciest, most luxury building in LA County today, but somewhere sort of middle of the road. That $3,000 times 50 months, times 50 units, times 12 months, year after year, is going to net you $1.8 million in your first year. And if we assume $5,000 per unit per year of expenses, caveat, I've never worked in market rate development, so if anyone who wants to help me refine these assumptions and make them a little more accurate, please feel free to reach out. But as a baseline to compare affordable and mixed income to, if we just assume $250,000 a year of expenses, there's going to be $1.55 million left over, which can be used to raise the $20 million you need to actually get this thing built and underway. I think that if you project out this income and these expenses over about 20 years using conservative inflation assumptions, I think it's reasonable to expect that a lender and an investor, between the two of them, would probably be willing to come up with $20 million up front in order to take their respective shares of this net operating income over the next 20 years. And so this is kind of the bare bones basics of how a sort of self-sustaining, unsubsidized market rate apartment building would work finances wise. And as a reminder, this $3,000 rent is affordable to a household making $120,000, which is a bit over the median in LA County for most household sizes, 1 through 4 people, I think. Okay, well, we are here to talk about affordable housing. Let's say we want to serve not above median, but half of the median, very low income households. Well, the first thing to note is that the development cost is probably going to increase. All things being equal, affordable housing is subject to extra layers of rules and regulations and requirements, labor, environmental, and other restrictions that all sort of add up to add costs to the development. So this is probably going to cost, all things being equal, maybe $30 million, let's say. That very low income rent, that affordable rent for a very low income household, I think for 2 people, I looked it up, maybe for 3 people in LA County this year, the affordable rent, 30% of income would be $1,350. So you see it's a lot less income coming in, $810K. The operating expenses will probably be a bit higher too. There's additional rules and requirements that affordable housing is subject to, plus supportive services requirements for the residents. So the operating expenses will be a little bit higher, but the bills can get paid in with this budget assumption. And there's even some leftover net operating income. This is probably enough, I think, to raise around $5 million from a lender. And so that's great. These very low income rents can keep the building's bills paid and keep it sort of feasible month over month, year over year, and even raise enough interest from a lender to make a $5 million loan. But we're still $25 million short in order to get this thing built. And if we are interested in serving those with the greatest need in extremely low income households, if those 50 units are collecting only $625 a month, now our income, especially if the expenses are higher, if there is, as there often is, a sort of special needs requirement to serve homeless households, veterans, households with disabilities at these extremely low income levels, the expenses might be a little bit higher during operations as well. So in this scenario, we don't even have enough rental money coming in to pay all of the bills in a year. And so there's certainly not going to be any interest in a loan from a lender or an investment equity from an investor. And so that's where the subsidy comes in that we talked about in green in that earlier slide. During development, the 2 sort of major categories of public funding, public subsidy to make these projects work. Josh mentioned the low-income housing tax credit. LIHTC funds and governs, I believe, the vast majority of new affordable housing development, not just in California, but I believe nationwide. And since there's no rental cash flow to attract an investor, not nearly enough when the rents are so low, the low-income housing tax credit provides for qualifying eligible affordable housing developments tax benefits to lure an investor instead. So the investor can put up some of the many $1 million that you need up front, and as long as the building meets the requirements and stays in compliance for the next 10 to 15 years, instead of money in the form of rent, they essentially get coupons on their next 10 to 15 years worth of tax returns. And so that's how that investor makes back their return. But the low-income housing tax credit equity will never cover the total cost of development. And in California, the LIHTC equity plus that loan will almost never cover the full cost either. And so that's where local funds, state funds, federal funds come into play to fill that final gap. Not enough time to discuss some of the alphabet soup that you see there, but every one of these funding programs comes with its own rules, its own requirements, many of which govern income levels, rent levels, population requirements, like if it's for veterans, the VHHP, Veterans Housing and Homelessness Program, HHH in the city of LA had a homelessness requirement. Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities has sustainability requirements for the building, etc. And so the developer cobbles together these capital sources enough to get the building built. And as we saw, they might also need the subsidy during operations. The 2 main types, a rental subsidy provides a sort of fixed higher project income than the low tenant rent every single month, every single year for several years. The operating subsidy looks at How much of a shortfall do you have because these rents are not high enough to cover the bills, and the operating subsidy will bridge that gap. And these operating and rental subsidies come often with their own income, population, and other requirements as well, just like the capital or development sources do. And so where they would fit in our examples, this very low income building, again, it's paying its bills and it can even support a modest loan. So it really needs capital subsidy during the development stage to get the thing built. One-time funds to get it built and out, and then it's on its way, and it looks like it's going to be self-sustaining. The extremely low income building, this is not able to be feasible. Even if you could get the thing built, you're not able to cover all of your expenses, and so it's definitely going to need some rental or operating subsidy. Let's say your local housing authority would provide a total of $2,000 between the tenant affordable rent, and they'll pay the balance up to $2,000 a month. Well, that's going to prop up the income, which will prop up the NOI, which with these particular numbers will probably allow you to support an even larger loan than the $5 million loan in the very low income building. Great. Now to get to $30 million, you only need to find 21 million left of a combination of low-income housing tax credit, equity, and state, local, sometimes federal funds. So this is the 100% affordable, usually governed by the low-income housing tax credit. But in other models, say in a public housing model before the moratorium on new public housing in the 1970s, all of your funders might have been public sector, possibly even the lender. You might not have needed a private investor. The fundamentals of there's costs that have to get paid up front and there's costs that have to get paid on an ongoing basis. Can the rent cover them? And if not, there's got to be some additional subsidy to prop up the finances. To compare our market rate building to a mixed income building where higher rent units offset the shortfall from the lower rent units. Let's say we want 20% of the units in the building to serve those very low income households at that $1,350 rent. So we're not satisfied with just serving median or above median income households. $1,350 on those 10 units. If we hold everything else the same, we don't want any public subsidy. We're trying to avoid, it can be a long process, as Josh mentioned, and it can add a lot of time. You might not get those funds. We want this thing to be up and running, and we just want cross subsidization within the building. Well, those 10 units, if we still have to raise the $20 million to get the thing built, if those 10 units every month, every year are collecting $1,350 as their starting rent, those other 40 units are going to have to be able to command a $3,413 rent in order for us to hit the same income, NOI, and lender and investor targets. If those 40 units are collecting a lower rent, even at $3,000, holding all things equal, we're probably not going to be able to raise the same amount of funds. To do one more hypothetical, let's say we want half of the building to be affordable for low-income households, and we want it affordable for extremely low-income households, $625 rent. In order to hold everything else equal, those other 25 units would have to command a $5,375 rent, which it works out to be affordable for $215,000 household incomes. Now you start getting into some feasibility questions. Is a person who's interested in paying $5,000 plus per month, is your building going to be fancy enough to attract 25? Maybe. In which case you could, presumably afford to have the other 25 units in the building collect just $625. But this is quite often why in inclusionary housing programs you see, 5, 10, 20. In New York, you sometimes see 30% low-income units and the balance market rate. But this would be an example of internally cross-subsidized, no need for public funds, as long as you can get those market rate units at a high enough rent to offset the affordable units for the low-income households at those lower rents. So that's it. Just coming back to the basic concept, the rental income has to cover the monthly and annual bills with enough left over to repay the funding sources that put up the cash up front to get the thing built in the first place. And if those rents are not high enough, you're going to need public funds subsidy, either upfront or ongoing, or both.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ben. That's a lot of info. But I think that even just letting some of that trickle in, I'm starting to be like, okay, this is making sense. So some folks in the chat did ask if you would be okay to share those slides with folks, and if you would like to, if you want to, please put your email address in the chat for folks so that way they can reach out and maybe get those slides from you.
Sure. Can I talk with you afterwards, Josh? Because it might reveal my terrible PowerPoint skills. I might have to make a little custom PDF or something.
Absolutely, I got you. Don't even worry about it. Okay. So wow. Okay, so that gets us started. I'm wondering, Josh and Alan, what, based on that, where do we go from there? Right now, that's information that we have. We need, subsidies and things like that. So what does it look like to actually use that information to get a project funded?
Alan, you want to? You put yourself on mute. So I'll
you unmuted first. You go.
Okay. Well, I really like that presentation, Ben. Thank you. That was really helpful. And I think that the take-home point is really that for almost every project built in the affordable housing space, and really throughout California, requires the use of low-income housing tax credits. And then on top of that, if you want to get down into even deeper levels of affordability, then you need to bring in other sources of soft financing. And that, through the state, through HCD, there's a number of sources. Also, cities and counties in like Los Angeles and LA County, for example, are big players in this space. Up in Northern California, Santa Clara County is one that comes to mind. They also have their own sources of soft financing, and the soft financing is really used to, the more soft financing you have, the deeper rents you can drive down rents to deeper and deeper levels. There's a lot to talk about there, but I think one of the, in terms of like, Josh, to answer your question, how you make all this actually work and how do you actually build projects and kind of what are some needs that we see in California is, it is not easy to access that financing. The low-income housing tax credit in and of itself has a very high barrier to entry. You need to have a relatively sophisticated real estate development company to navigate just even applying for tax credits, and then knowing how to deploy those credits in a way that follows all the regulatory, follows a regulatory environment that's required to build a tax credit project. And then when you start bringing in soft financing, as Ben mentioned, each of those soft financing sources have their own set of regulation and their own requirements. And so oftentimes the projects that we see here at Century Housing will have 3 to 5 different layers of financing, sometimes even more, sometimes 8 to 10, depending on how deep the affordability goes. And so what's really difficult is as developers try to drive down affordability is that they have to adhere to so many different standards. So that's kind of issue one. Issue two is how do they actually go about getting that financing? Well, in California, unlike other states, each of those soft financing sources and the low-income housing tax credit itself requires a separate application. We've recently made some consolidation. So there is now what we call a supernova that has consolidated a few programs into one application, which is a really good first step. But the point remains true that developers have to apply numerous times to different programs in order to build a single project. And that, that's expensive because time is money. You're holding land in some situations. You have to have a team in place to make all these applications and to do it well. So you have really high, not only a high barrier to entry in terms of how complex these financing stacks are, but you also have another high barrier to entry that you can't do this on your own. You have to really have a team, or you have to be willing to engage consultants like CHPC to do the heavy lifting for you. And so that takes time and that takes money to do all that. And then to make, to add another kind of curveball is these are very highly competitive sources of financing as well. So even if you've done everything perfectly and if you found the perfect site and you have your team in place and you have all the experience you need to do, put together a good application, you're not guaranteed to get financing. Tax credit projects, depending on what type of tax credit you're going for, whether it be a 9% or 4%, often take multiple rounds. And then, soft financing as well is very competitive. So affordable housing developers have to be very resilient, and they have to be willing to be very patient, and they have to, have the intestinal fortitude to go through with projects that sometimes may take 3 or 4 years to come together. And we can talk about the NIMBY piece of it as well. Just real quickly, and I want to let Alan have a chance to say something. After you've gone through all those different steps and you've gotten all your financing in place, you then have to bring this project and actually start construction. You have to bring this project to fruition, and that often, requires engagement with the local community and the local politicians. And obviously we've all heard of the NIMBY term, and they're kind of the big bugaboo in our industry. But I'll tell you this, and some positive, to kind of spin this in a more positive way and to kind of bring us to a more hopeful conclusion, is that because of a lot of changes at the state level, many affordable housing projects can now be done by right, which is a huge sea change in our industry. So we really, Century, where most of our financing is for early stage land acquisition, we care very deeply about the path towards entitlements. And we've seen just kind of over the years, developers bringing us more and more projects that could be done by right because of the advocacy at the state level to basically override and supersede local governments when it comes to the production of affordable housing. So that's a really hopeful sign. And I also think I've heard so many success stories, and Alan, I'm sure you have too, where developers are coming into a community who is maybe skeptical or suspicious of affordable housing. And there's so many really skilled and talented people that we work with in our industry who've been able to meet with community groups, absorb their, all the negative things they have to say, and then be able to engage in dialogue and kind of shift the perception of affordable housing to where, people who were once against the project kind of are now for the project or advocates for the project, because they realize that the only way to, if you run a small business, you want your workers to be able to live within a short commute of your business because they'll stay at the job for longer. So that's and affordable housing is a really healthy part of a ecosystem if you're a small business owner. Especially I'm out here on the west side of Los Angeles, and I would love to have people who can live and work in my community rather than me worried that their 3-hour commute from Lancaster is going to finally wear them out. And the other piece of it is just the homelessness is such a visual reminder of the need for affordable housing, that when you can go into community room and say, this is actually going to be a practical on the ground solution for helping us address this homeless crisis. What would you rather have? Would you rather have this person living housed and cared for, or would you rather have them living in front of your business or on the street in front of your school? And to kind of make that, help people connect the dots. And we have a really good, I work with real estate, affordable housing developers all day long. I'm always so impressed by how they're able to articulate that argument in such a passionate way that I see a lot. There's still a huge issue of NIMBYs, I get that, but there's a lot of success stories as well. And I think we need to be reminded about that. So Alan, why don't you, sorry to talk so long, Alan, I'll hand the mic off to you.
Well, as I said, as we were organizing this thing with Ben and Josh on the panel, I'm lucky to be able to add anything. You guys are so substantively strong, and I thought for somebody like me, the pictures, Ben, are really, really helpful. The idea that we could sort of watch and look at the financials to be able to understand what it takes, because those elements are essential. Those are really the building blocks, if you will, to making buildings. There are two concepts as it relates to building buildings. One is particularly residential housing that's affordable low-income people. One is that you want to build it so it doesn't fall down, and you want to build it that it stays affordable to low-income people as long as possible. And if you don't get the financing right, you don't get either of those outcomes. I think the only thing I want to add about 4 things to the commentary that's happened so far. One is, it is true that the low-income housing tax credit is the principal way by which we're building housing that's affordable low-income people right now today. I think it's always important to remember that the low-income housing tax credit is a creature of the Reagan Revolution. It's a deliberate attempt by the federal government to step out of the business of providing housing for low-income people and to incentivize the private sector to be in the business. So the tax credit, essentially the government giving a credit on a tax obligation to a private entity, is a way that you can build affordable housing. And there might be some other things that we'll talk about, like social housing and other views later on in this conversation that might be worth thinking about. The other thing that's important to remember is that in the low-income housing tax credit model, by and large, what you end up with is a public amenity, a public benefit that is owned and operated by a private entity. And those private entities come to this conversation in different ways. And so as a result, the product looks and feels different depending on who it is that builds it. And so our members, for example, are not only in the business of developing and operating affordable housing, but they really look at it as a mission set of work, really about the provision, the addressing, the alleviation of poverty through the provision of housing that's affordable to low-income people. And one of the ways that shows is that typically when a nonprofit developer builds an affordable housing development, they build it and they hold it in perpetuity. And in other cases, there might be a little bit of transfer of ownership. The second thing I want to say is that in all cases, whether it's low-income housing tax credits or other subsidy funds, as Josh alluded to, we're talking about limited resources. So the state only gets, I think it's something like $1.75 per capita, an allocation of federal tax credits every year. So there's a cap at which the state can provide tax credits. And on all the other funding measures. There's a limit to how much money is going to be available at one time, and there are competitive rules that are created. And so approximately, if you have 4 or 5 deals, apply for those limited resources, only one is getting funded. And then as Josh points out, when you go for those, after you get your tax credits, when you, actually goes the other way around, these soft subsidy funds, Triple H, Housing Community Development Funds from the state, you typically apply for them sequentially. So you get one, and then once you get one, you use that to be more competitive to get the other. And if you get knocked out of a competition on one, then you're delayed because the sequential strategy has been interrupted. And so in some cases, that ends up being one of the reasons why these things, affordable housing deals, take a long time. The other thing that hasn't been talked about at all is, although Josh sort of alluded to it on the NIMBY side, and that is that particularly in the city of LA, we have done things in the course of public policy, certainly in the last few years, to sort of address and make sure that things could get built. And I noticed that somebody asked a question about, but what does by right mean? So essentially, by right means that you have a set of rules that are usually locally determined that say what you can build on a specific piece of land. And as long as your development fits within those rules, you can build your building without a bunch of discretionary approvals along the way. You can build it by right. And oftentimes, in the affordable housing context, in order to meet the by right determinations, developers will actually forego the opportunity to build additional units, or the financing will be limited in such a way that they will forego building additional units in order to create a more efficient path. And I think that's a place where public policy has actually kind of gotten in the way. But as Josh mentions, there's been some real courage demonstrated at the state level over the last few years, and folks like Abundant Housing have done a really good job of try to break down those local barriers by having the state supersede. The other thing I want to say about the perception of changing minds, when you go to the community, you talk to folks, typically what happens is you say you want to build a building that's going to house low-income people, and people have a concept in their mind of what it's going to look like and how it's going to work. And one of the things we found that is really, really effective, particularly the folks who are really, truly open-minded, that you can address some of those concerns by actually showing them what affordable housing is and what it looks like. And so oftentimes our members will take neighborhood councils, for example, on a tour and show them other buildings that they're building close to the neighborhood, and then show them what buildings you might have. And that often does some things to kind of defang opposition. And then the last thing I'll say is that just like in the regular, in a market rate residential real estate development market, affordable housing development operates by not only the same financial rules that Ben outlined, but the other one really is this idea of risk mitigation, basically protecting the financial resources that you have from the risk that you're taking by proposing to build a building through certainty. So for example, this idea that if you want to build a building and you want to build it by right, if you build it within the context of the rules that are there, you know that you're going to be able to efficiently be able to build your building. Similarly, for an affordable housing deal, and somebody having a hard time hearing me, am I not speaking up? Or no? So let me see if I can change my speaker microphone.
Is that any better? I feel, is that better? Okay. Certainty. Oh, so a different thing about certainty is that if you know as an affordable housing developer that you're going to have an opportunity to apply for certain resources, you will feel more certain about taking the risk of doing the pre-development work, acquiring a piece of property, hiring an architect to design it, starting the conversations around entitlement and things like that. So for example, Triple H in the city of Los Angeles put in $1.2 billion for the development of permanent supportive housing. People have a lot of opinions about whether that's going fast enough and whether it's going to meet the goals. But one thing I can absolutely tell you is that at the beginning of this year, in the first quarter of this year, the city had 54 Triple H developments under construction at one time. And at that time, that was the most affordable housing being built, actively being built in the city's history. So the city is, and the reason why that happens is because developers knew the money was available, they were going to be able to fund their project, and they started to do the work to get things started and build this pipeline. Today, City of LA has 101 projects, Triple H projects under development. So 101. So if we were at our peak 6 months ago, we're even at twice that peak today. And it's because of the certainty provided by Triple H. And unfortunately, Triple H funds are all committed. It took us several years to get deals into the pipeline to the place now where we're doing 101 deals. And every day that goes by, we have a gap in the pipeline. And so until we replace Triple H with additional funds, we're going to have this gap in the pipeline. And so my pitch to you, as I realize we're coming up towards the top of the hour, is that in the fall, each of you that live in the city of Los Angeles will have the opportunity to vote on initiative, what that's called United to House LA. And I'm happy to go into some detail, but essentially it's a real estate transfer tax on residential and commercial properties above $5 million. And the resources raised through that tax will do two things. One is that they will help make sure that people who are in danger of becoming homeless, particularly seniors and veterans, have resources necessary to keep them in their homes, which we all know is a better approach, the least expensive approach to housing, keeping people housed as opposed to letting them get on the streets and then figuring out how to get them houses more effective. And the second thing is it will fund at about the same level as Triple H, the development of affordable housing, and then it will explore a bunch of interesting other ways to build housing too. And I'm happy to talk about that to you if time allows.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. So yeah, we are running a little short on time. So I kind of want to turn to the Q&A just a little bit, just to get some of these questions answered. So you've done a couple of them. Alan addressed the by right thing, so thank you so much for that. We also have a couple of questions. So someone asked, is there a list of buildings that receive the tax credit, like available to the public?
Yes, I can put a link in there.
Cool.
Let me think about it. So you're talking about, let me think about that for a second. There's a way to get to that number though.
Thank you. Next, someone asked, with an oversubscription of 4% LIHTC, should we begin to find ways to build affordable housing without tax credits and bonds?
Yes. It's very hard to do. I've seen a handful of projects that are being delivered that are being constructed without low-income housing tax credits. And what they're basically doing is they are building, studio units, small studio units, typically 400 to 600 square feet a piece. They are, basically permanent supportive housing properties. And these are developers who have been able to master lease all of the units with a service provider. And what that means is service providers, in the Los Angeles area and beyond, are providing care and services to people transitioning from homelessness. They have a network of future potential tenants. They also are working through the coordinated entry system. And so what they will say to developers is, you build a project, you build it, according to these specifications within this community. You go find the land, you get the permits, you bring your contractor in, you build the building, and then we'll fill it with tenants. And those tenants will each have their own tenant-based voucher, housing choice voucher. So the tenants will have their own, basically rent subsidy source that they've already been able to procure, or the service provider will help them access those services. So the service provider then moves in, say, 50 tenants into this new 50-unit building. Each of those tenants has their own rent voucher. And what the service provider does is they will master lease the whole building. So they will basically go to the developer and guarantee a lease payment every month that's equal to the combined rent of all of those 50 units. And that allows the developer to, have the confidence to build the building. And also the developer will know that there'll be an income source that will be available to pay the debt service on my building after it's completed. So that is a relatively new product type. There are a small handful of developers who are doing that. It sounds easier. It's easier said than done, because a really important part of this whole equation is that the developer is teaming up with a really good service provider, and that it's in a community, in a neighborhood that's amenable to that kind of housing type. So Century has seen a handful of these. We have passed on a lot of them because we just weren't confident that the developer was locating these in areas that had good community resources and public transportation. That being said, we've financed our fair share of these as well when we felt that the service provider and the developer were in alignment with the understanding of the type of care that's going to be needed for the long term to make sure that these projects not only are financially feasible, but are well managed and well operated properties. And so, but there's a small handful of people doing this. It's so far been very hard to bring this to scale. And I'm hopeful that over the next 5 to 10 years, that this becomes a product type that's more mainstream.
Thank you so much. We have only a couple minutes left, so we're gonna have to wrap up now. But I want to thank everyone, our panelists, our attendees for coming. It's been really great. I know that there's a lot of juicy information that we want to get into and we want to go further. So we can do some follow-up events. I want to let people know that if you want to get involved with Abundant Housing LA, there are a couple of ways you can do that. And so I will post a link in the chat to sign up, so that way you can get our newsletter, you can get our action alerts, and you can find other ways to contact and support and work with us. And then also, we have something called the Housing Advocates Committee. Some of the questions that guided this panel today came from our education committee on our Housing Advocates Council. I think I called it a Housing Advocates Committee, and that's not what I meant. Housing Advocates Council. But if you are a member of Abundant Housing LA and want to give us your input on a number of our plans and strategies, I definitely recommend checking out becoming a member, and then also looking at the Housing Advocates Council information. Also, Ben, if you're interested in hearing more from Ben is one of our instructors in the AHLA Pro Housing Certification course that we have starting on September 1st. We've got about 12 weeks of content that goes everywhere from equity and policy to development and land use and historical landmarks. Really, really great information, really, really great to equip yourself with, so that way you can go be the best public policy person, advocator, all kinds of things. So it's really amazing. If you'd like to learn more about that, please visit this link in the chat. And if you have any questions, we have discounts, we have need-based waivers. Please send me an email and we will get those for you. We have an early bird discount that's happening right now. Takes off a nice big chunk of that enrollment fee. So please let us know. And then the last thing is, if you're interested in getting involved in a chapter, I would recommend that you reach out to our director of organizing, and his name is Jaime Del Rio. He will help you find a chapter that you can attend meetings, start organizing around things that matter in your neighborhood. And so I just put his email in the chat as well. Alan, Ben, Josh, thank you so much for giving us this taste into affordable housing, what it takes to get these projects funded and get them going. We have a lot to learn. We have a lot to incorporate into our practices in all of this, and we have you to thank you for that info. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and keep up with us so that you can be at our next cool event, because this was cool. I think this was cool. This was cool.
That's great. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it.
No problem. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much.